The G20 Summit kicked off in Osaka, Japan today, bringing together world leaders in one place. President Moon Jae-in got things started with his summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping and is set to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin in just a few hours. During the global gathering, President Moon is expected to promote his peace drive, taking the opportunity of multilateral diplomatic talks. Today, we go in-depth on the G20 Summit and the prospects of peace on the Korean Peninsula with Dr. Kim Jae-chun, professor at the Graduate School of International Studies at Sogang University. Thank you so much for coming in today.
It's good to be here.
Host nation Japan has selected 8 themes for this year's G20 Summit, which include the global economy, trade, investment, innovation, environment and energy, and women empowerment. Could you first tell us the goal of this year's G20 Summit?
Well, the goal of this G20 is to promote those important agendas that you just mentioned. But important thing, I think, is that we'll have to pay attention to the fact that this G20 is taking place in the middle of escalating tension between the two great powers, namely the U.S. and China. The two countries are fighting trade war, and they are having a serious conflict over Huawei issue. And the spirit of G20 is if you really have a trade dispute or trade issues, you have to talk them over within the framework of a G20 multilateral summit, but there is just no way for the G20 multilateral summit itself can address these important trade issues that these two countries are embroiled in. So that is kind of unfortunate and ironic, because the objective of G20 is to bring these leaders, bringing in these important leaders from more important 20 countries in the world to talk about these important issues that you just mentioned. But this time, all the eyes are on the sidelines. I mean, the bilateral summits that are taking place, sidelines of G20 multilateral summits. So I think it's a little bit ironic and unfortunate, and it's a testament to the fact that international politics is overwhelmed by great power rivalry or great power politics between the United States and China.
Right, so quite the irony there. And you've brought up the trade conflict between the G2, and on a related note to that, according to reports, Japan has left out the phrase anti-trade protectionism from the joint declaration draft, but that phrase is normally put in the draft every year. Instead, Japan included promotion of free trade in the draft. How do you see this move?
Well, originally the joint statement included that phrase or that clause that G20 is against protectionist trends in the world, but later it changed it to we are for facilitation of free trade. Why this change? I guess it's the pressure coming from the Trump administration in the United States. Trump obviously is a protectionist. And I think he really wanted to change that phrase desperately. I think there's a reason why finally the Japan decided to drop out that phrase. So as I said, I mean, it's a little bit ironical or sad to a certain extent that G20, that multilateral spirit is lost and overwhelmed by great power rivalry and great power politics.
Expected backlash from that move? I'm sure many countries will be openly discontent about it. Yeah,
I see a backlash, but Trump will be Trump. He'll stay the course, and this time the host nation is Japan, and Japan sort of placed all the bets on the American side in this escalating rivalry or hegemonic struggle between the two countries, the U.S. and China. So sure, there will be a blowback or a backlash, if you will, but I think Trump will stay the course.
How did you see the South Korea-China summit last night? President Xi Jinping mentioned that North Korea's will to denuclearize remains unchanged, and that China hopes to make more contributions to build peace on the Korean Peninsula. What is it that China wants now?
I think China wants to portray itself as playing a very important mediator role to facilitate nuclear negotiation that has been in stalemate since the Hanoi summit. So I guess by doing so, President Xi might thinking that he could elicit some concessions from the Trump administration, from President Trump on trade war fronts. But I'm not really sure whether that gambit would work this time, because Mr. Trump made it clear that nuclear weapons issue and the trade issues are two separate issues. So we'll have to see. But certainly, Mr. Xi wants to present himself as a new mediator, and sending this message to Americans, to the Trump administration, that if you are playing Huawei card and then Hong Kong card and Taiwan card, really whatnot, really, then we have this card to play, and that is North Korea card. I think so. That's a message that President Xi wants to impart to the Trump administration.
Now, the controversial issue of THAAD, or Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, was also brought up during the summit, last night's summit between President Moon Jae-in and Xi Jinping. How do you forecast the future of this thorny issue between Seoul and Beijing?
Well, I think President Xi once again made it very clear that THAAD issue is not over, and issued a very stern warning to South Koreans that you shouldn't be siding with the United States in this trade war or a hegemonic war between the two countries. I mean, yes, THAAD issue is not over, and if you pick a side, if you side with the United States on the Huawei issue, remember THAAD. Like THAAD, there will be consequences and repercussions. You will suffer. So it is a somber reminder that South Korea is in a very difficult position between the U.S. and China. It is a testament to the fact that we are really caught between rock and hard places. So that's something that we'll have to deal with and think about for a long time.
So quite a number of major diplomatic issues as well as economic issues are intertwined. Now, Russian President Putin, when he met with Kim Jong-un in April, called on the need to resume multilateral talks in order to resolve North Korea's nuclear issue. And as you know, he will meet with President Moon Jae-in in just a few hours. How do you expect the outcome of the South Korea-Russia summit tonight?
Well, I think other than North Korean issue, two leaders will talk about possible economic cooperation projects between the two countries. But as you said, President Xi will spend a lot of time, a great deal of time, to talk about North Korean nuclear weapons issue. Mr. Xi also wants to present himself as Russia as a important stakeholder country in North Korean nuclear weapons negotiation process, to sort of give a hard time to the Trump administration. Mr. Xi will constantly float this idea that we should be multilateralizing nuclear negotiation, which has been basically a bilateral between the U.S. and North Korea. So yes, I think he will emphasize the need to bring back six-party format. But at the same time, I do think that Mr. Putin understands that nuclear weapons issue is basically a bilateral issue between the U.S. and North Korea. So he's not going to push this idea too far. I don't think he's going to push the envelope too far here. But then again, he will emphasize the importance of resolving North Korean nuclear weapons issue in peaceful manner. And it is very important to provide a security guarantee to Kim Jong-un regime. So yes, he will present himself as a mediator, if you will, and Russia as a power to be reckoned with. And then President Moon will also praise Russian efforts to settle these issues in peaceful manners. So to that extent, I think both leaders have something in common to resolve North Korean nuclear weapons issue in peaceful manner. But I don't really think that there is much that Russia could do to facilitate nuclear negotiation that has been in stalemate since the Hanoi summit.
President Putin, following his summit with Kim Jong-un, has stated that North Korean regime's survival can be guaranteed through multilateral talks. So you do think that he will bring that up once more tonight? Yeah,
I think he will bring that up once again tonight. But how he's going to equivocate. But I think as with China, Russia wants these sanctions to be lifted at earlier stage. I think that's a way of providing security guarantee to North Korea. So he will emphasize the importance of lifting sanctions at the earlier stage than later. There's a difference between Russia and the U.S. and China and the U.S. because the U.S. wants these sanctions lifted at the last stage of denuclearization process. So yes, he will be siding with China and North Korea. So we can certainly see that there is a divide, a continental power and oceanic power as to how to implement denuclearization process.
And tomorrow, the world will zoom in on President Trump and Xi Jinping's trade war showdown. Many experts, however, have downplayed that a breakthrough is likely tomorrow. But what kind of results do you expect from this highly anticipated high-stakes summit?
Well, it's hard to tell. I think Mr. Xi will be a little bit more conciliatory because he's certainly on the defensive side in this trade war with the United States. So he will make certain concessions, I believe. But to what extent, I would know. As I said, Mr. Trump will be Mr. Trump. He will be applying maximum pressure onto Mr. Xi to elicit as many concessions as possible. So he will certainly play a hardball. But I'm not really sure whether these two leaders will compromise. But I think they will back up from their original positions that they took originally. Otherwise, there's not going to be a breakthrough or there's not going to be a compromise, which is a big disaster to the world economy. So I certainly hope that two leaders will reach a certain compromise.
Of course, no one can know for sure what will happen during tomorrow's summit between Trump and Xi Jinping, but you think Xi Jinping would make more concessions than Trump?
Yes, because he doesn't really have many cards to play. It's like UFC, I mean, this match, UFC match, I mean, both sides will bleed, but it comes down to the matter of who's going to bleed more. If the war continues like this for a long period of time, I think it's going to be China who will be bleeding more, although the U.S. will bleed as well. So given that fact, I think President Xi will make more of a concession this time.
To what extent do you think North Korea's nuclear issue will be discussed between Trump and Xi Jinping?
I think both leaders will agree on this principle that nuclear weapons issue will have to be resolved in peaceful manner. But I don't think those two leaders will go into too much detail this time because it's going to be a thorny issue. But I guess one card that President Xi could play is to promise to Mr. Trump that I will be facilitating nuclear negotiations and I will bring North Koreans back to the negotiation table. That way, President Xi could please Mr. Trump, and that way he could elicit certain concessions on the trade war front. So that's as far as those two leaders will discuss North Korean nuclear weapons issue this time. I think they will be discussing, they will be spending more time on trade war issues this time.
Now, you've mentioned that China wants to play a bigger role. It wants to be a more important player now in denuclearizing North Korea. Do you think Trump would like that or dislike that?
Well, as I said, I mean, if Mr. Xi facilitates nuclear negotiations, President Trump will be pleased. But if Mr. Xi frustrates American efforts in North Korea, President Trump will be very unhappy. And a number of times, President Trump said that, well, China is in the way. China is complicating North Korean nuclear weapons issue and then delaying the denuclearization process by giving some sanctions relief to North Koreans. So overall, I really don't think Trump is evaluating President Xi's role or China's role in North Korean nuclear weapons issue. But it really depends on how Mr. Xi is going to play North Korean nuclear weapons card this time.
We still have to see whether President Moon Jae-in will sit down for talks with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. But at this point, it looks like a formal, official summit between the two is very unlikely. Could you explain to us why?
Well, I guess it's because the relationship between the two countries is at the lowest point since the normalization of the diplomatic relations between the two countries in 1965. I guess I think it is very important, imperative for both governments, particularly the Moon government, to take this more of a pragmatic approach to Japan issue, approaching Japan issue with a future-oriented mindset, if you will. And also, likewise, Mr. Shinzo Abe will have to do more to mend fences between the two countries. Otherwise, I think the relationship between the two countries will take a turn for the worse. So it's imperative for both governments to do more to mend fences.
And speaking of which, I know this could be a tough question, but what would you say is a viable solution to the decades-old historical feud between Seoul and Tokyo?
Well, as I said, I mean, pragmatic attitude and then future-oriented mindset, because we are embroiled in this, I don't know, both countries, and particularly South Korea, is locked in this victim mentality. But you'll have to realize that two countries have a lot in common, and it's in both countries' interests to cooperate more rather than antagonize each other. So maybe this time G20 agendas are very global agendas that South Korea could agree with. So maybe we can put aside some of the more intractable issues, such as history issues, and we can cooperate with Japan on those sort of easier issues, such as how to deal with aging society, how to empower women, and how to deal with cross-border data transfer issue, and so on and so forth. I mean, these are really important global agendas that both countries can cooperate with. So that's one avenue through which both countries can get past history and get closer on talking about these important global issues that are important to the international community as a whole.
One last question for you. Mr. Trump is due in Seoul tomorrow and will hold a summit with President Moon on Sunday. What is your expectation of the summit outcome?
I don't think there's going to be any dramatic turnaround during the visit this time. But I think it is going to be important for both leaders. And I think both leaders will impart a certain message to North Koreans that negotiation is open, both countries, and then both leaders are up for the negotiation. But important thing is that we'll have to start negotiation by starting working level discussion. There we'll have to agree on a big deal or comprehensive agreement that defines what really constitutes denuclearization and what really constitutes security guarantee to North Koreans. So I think it's going to be very important for both leaders to impart a certain message to North Korean leader that we are open to the negotiation, but we can't really start these negotiations by holding another summit between the U.S. and North Korea without laying out any groundwork by holding working level discussions. So I think both leaders will have to agree on starting with working level discussion, and later if they can, if North Korea and the U.S. could agree on this big framework of denuclearization and security guarantee to North Koreans, then implementation of this framework or agreement can be done by taking step-by-step measures. So I think both leaders will have to send a very, very clear message to North Koreans. that negotiation will have to start with the working level discussion. Maybe you know, if we agree on a big framework of denuclearization and then security guarantee, the implementation of this framework can be really done by taking certain steps. Maybe if the first step can be a dismantling of Yongbyon nuclear facilities, and in return for that, the U.S. could pledge that they would help out lifting these sanctions with some snapback measure. So I think that's the way we should go. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Dr. Kim, so much for your profound knowledge tonight.
Thank you for having me.
And that does it for this edition of News in Depth. From all of us here at Arirang, thank you for watching.